Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to this morning's session, which is on the from 27 to 9, which is obviously talking about the changes to our community governance structures and more particularly changes to the community boards, which will come into effect following the elections on the 12th of October. So the changes, and particularly the move to have 9 community boards covering the whole of Southland District, rather than a mixture of, I think we've had 19 CDAs up in this current term and 8 community boards, is quite a significant change for the organisation, and in fact, well, the most significant change to our structure since 1989 reforms. And in particular, previously we've had these large grey areas that haven't had that second tier of representation provided by the boards themselves. Rather, they have relied on just the council laws, who obviously represent the district as a whole. So the move to create district-wide coverage for community boards that cover multiple communities, whereas a lot of our boards have historically covered just one individual urban area. Our boards will now have model urban communities, so if you take the Northern Ward, for example, they'll cover Lumsden, Mosman, Capil and Garston, as well as the surrounding rural areas themselves. All represent quite a change for them and take a wee while, no doubt, for them to get used to those changes. So given the significance of the change itself and the importance of the new structure working, we've been doing quite a bit of work on thinking about how do we best support the new governance structure at a staff level, and what are some of the processes we need to have in place to make that easier and work more effectively. So we are, for example, proposing a number of new processes such as quarterly service delivery workshops, in which all the board members will be invited to come in and get an understanding on what are issues across the region as a whole, which we can usefully brief them on, but also then have what could be referred to as a bit of a speed dating process with different activity managers to engage in a conversation about the particular issues going on within that activity in their area or across the district that are of relevance. So the bridge issue that's around at the moment, for example, would be a good opportunity for Hartley's the roading team, transport team and Hartley and Co to brief the boards on the process they're going through to address the particular challenges around bridges at the moment. So that's a good example of where the quarterly community board workshop process will provide a much more efficient way of dealing with issues that are of common interest to our new community boards. So Rex is going to run you through some more of the detail and the supporting processes, and then very happy to take any questions, because this is what we're talking about here, proposals, and very open to changing and evolving them as we work with the new structure, new boards, and what we find is effective on the ground. So hand over to you, Rex.
So this is our 7th and final one of these sessions. We had a couple of really good sessions last Thursday in Te Anau and Winton, where the staff actually really engaged in the questions and feedback around what it means from their perspective and what questions they might be asked, especially at the coalface, or if they're out and about socially, around what some of these changes actually really mean at an operational level and also from an elected representative perspective. So that's ultimately what how we've tried to pitch these conversations is what does it mean, and we know that going from 27 to 9, it's going to mean that how we work with our community boards will be different to what we might have traditionally done when there's been 27 of these entities. So I wanted to really cover off 4 main things as part of this conversation today. The first one is to actually walk our way through that diagram, or that single slide, which is really what is being proposed based on how we've operated under the 2016 to 19 triennium, what we're looking at proposing to the new mayor or the mayor of the new triennium, and the new council of the new triennium post the election on 12th of October. So Steve will sit down with the new mayor-elect post 12 October and one of the first things they will do is actually get a structure worked through so that it is able to be put up to the first council meeting on the 1st of November, the inaugural and first business meeting of council on the 1st of November for the operating structure for the next triennium to come into being. The second thing that I'll cover off will be a bit more about the whole community governance approach and the two pillars that make up that approach, being the representative leadership, which is basically what council's role in community governance is, and also talk a wee bit about community-led development and the approach that council is promoting with its communities to take a bit more of a responsibility to support themselves in delivering and being part of the solutions that impact on their communities and again at the grassroots level. The third thing I'll talk about is a bit more of the change that Steve's alluded to. So what are some of the new things that we are introducing from an operational level to support and assist us, and then summarising, and pretty much the summary is short because really the key message about what we're talking about here is all about relationships, all about developing relationships, building relationships and maintaining relationships, and ensuring that there is communication and two-way communication is really at the heart of what we're trying to support in terms of council, community council, the relationships that are being built and need to be built in terms of going forward to support what we're here to do, which is to serve communities. So I just want to again, so let's go back to this diagram, appreciating that this is still a proposed structure, that it will be up to the new council to determine what its committee and subcommittee structure is. The only bit that the council can't determine is the 9 community boards. So the 9 community boards that are going to be in operation from 2019 for the triennium 2019 through to 2022 will come out as a result of a community governance review which this council undertook from about 2015. So when I came back into the organisation, one of the first tasks that Steve gave to me was to undertake a community governance review, looking at what works, what doesn't, looking at what else works around the country. And then that eventually, through to about 2017, morphed into supporting the work that we then were undertaking as part of the representation review. So the representation review is something that we as a council, every council has to do every 6 years, can do them earlier than a 6-year cycle, but every 6 years. And that representation review really is about reviewing what our representative leadership structure is from a council's perspective. And ultimately that looks at council, the number of councillors, how councillors are elected. It looks at our community board structure. It didn't look at our community development area subcommittee structure because that's outside of the representation review and outside of the Act. The community development area subcommittees, the 19 of them, were something which are specific to this council. And actually become part of an approach that this council formed then as part of the subcommittee development. So the representation review only looked at council, how its councillors are elected, and the community boards. It made no changes, and through that process went out for consultation, received some submissions back in. Council made some alterations before it put its final proposal up, received some submissions back in on that. Eventually it went to the Local Government Commission for its determination because of those submissions and appeals against what was proposed. And the Local Government Commission's determination came out earlier this year, in which it deemed that there would be 9 community boards. So that's why council can't change or differ from the Local Government Commission's determination. So those 9 community boards, as they exist up there, are Fiordland, Northern Adlissa, Tuatapere, Te Waiwai, Oraka, Aparima, Wallace, Takatimu, Oriki, Waihopo, Tuatua and Stewart Island, Rakiura. The way council determined, or the way council is elected hasn't changed. So there are still 12 councillors and they are elected by way of ward representation, in which there are 5 wards. And some of those wards can elect 3 councillors, others 2, and Stewart Island has the ability to elect 1 councillor as part of the Stewart Island Rakiura ward. So, and the mayor and how the mayor is elected hasn't changed. So the mayor is elected at large across the whole of the district. So the main change with regards to the representation review was going from 8 community boards, which are on that map over there, in yellow, the area that they represent in yellow, to 9 community boards, but now the whole of the district is covered by a community board as far as its representation goes, going forward. And that's a significant change in terms of how we operate. In terms of what has been proposed for the governance structure for this triennium, we're pretty much suggesting that we're hoping the new council will operate on a similar committee structure. So we currently operate a Services and Assets Committee, where it's been proposed that a Services and Assets Committee will be re-established in the new triennium. We currently operate a Finance and Audit Committee, which covers off the areas of finance, health and safety and risk as its predominant areas of focus. We are again proposing that Finance and Audit, although it may be called a Finance and Assurance Committee, will be re-established or will be established for the new triennium. We currently operate a Regulatory and Consents Committee, which deals with the issues relating to primarily the Compliance and Environmental Services Group. And we're again proposing that be re-established for the new triennium, and we currently operate a Community and Policy Committee, which it may change its name to a Community and Strategy Committee, but will deal with the similar things, similar topics and areas of responsibility as per up there. Probably of most significance in terms of this triennium is, or 2 things. One is that it's not necessarily through good luck. I mean, it's through a process that we've been able to structure and develop our approach with the thinking that goes with it. That committee structure also predominantly represents or reflects our operational structure. Okay, so we have our Services and Assets Group. We have a finance team, and we have a people capability team with responsibilities for health and safety and finance. So they're covered off through the finance and audit. We have an environmental services group, which again will service the Regulatory and Consents Committee, and we have a Community and Futures group, which primarily their work will focus through to the community and strategy. There are bits where there's rollovers and toing and fro in between, but predominantly that committee structure reflects our operational structure. The other thing that we have tried to do through this structure is through any sort of subcommittee approach, because we haven't necessarily had a clear alignment of where the subcommittees fit and who and what they are responsible for, they've sort of remained out on their own. So what we've tried to do with this proposal is actually support the subcommittees by way of them reporting through to the appropriate community boards. Okay, so that's a bit of a change, because where the subcommittees have previously just sort of operated in isolation, what we're trying to do is support them to operate with a governance entity or representative entity, which is the community board. So you'll see, as is proposed here, the Te Anau Basin Water Supply Subcommittee, which we're suggesting will be re-established, will actually have a direct link and relationship to the Fiordland Community Board. It currently, who then, when any matters that need to go through to the council committee structure, will then report through to the Services and Assets Committee, and then ultimately up to council as is required. Similarly, there's 2 water supply subcommittees in the Northern Community Board boundaries, 5 Rivers and Matuku. So again, those water supply subcommittees will actually operate and align back through directly to the Northern Community Board, and again, if need be, through to the council committee, being the Services and Assets Committee. There's currently a Northern Southland Development Fund subcommittee which operates as a result of the Meridian Wind Farm development a number of years ago. Meridian provided some capital up front, or cash up front, in which council developed a subcommittee to maintain and allocate the funds related to that Northern Southland Development Fund. What we're proposing for the new triennium is that subcommittee won't actually need to be re-established, because its functions will be able to actually be delivered directly by the Northern Community Board. and so on. And as you can see, there's a number of other subcommittees there that currently exist that we are talking about. And the major change is that the Riverton Harbour subcommittee will actually align directly to the Oraka Aparima Community Board, and similarly the other ones under that. One of the ones we're talking about there is the Stewart Island Jetties subcommittee currently operates. We're suggesting that that won't necessarily need to be re-established, and in actual fact we can establish something outside of a committee structure or council structure, which could be a liaison group or an advisory group to the Stewart Island Rakiura Community Board. So again, what we're trying to do, I suppose, is show alignment of the subcommittee structures at the local level, relating them directly to a community board of the area that they have responsibility for, or an area that they are located in and have responsibility to. The major topic of conversation, especially with operational staff and staff who have the direct liaison, direct link to the community boards, is around what the order paper for the community board meetings will be like. So currently it's a bit of hit and miss. Currently there is the regular report on the community board is what we call the council community board order paper, or agenda is the council report, and then it's really up to if there's anything specific that needs a decision, and there's less and less decisions that have needed to be made by community boards as council is operating a much wider or a much more district-wide approach. What we're suggesting for the new community board structure in the order paper, there will be 4 distinct reports that hopefully, again, you'll see there's a bit of a method to our madness, and it's not necessarily good luck, that actually they reflect our operational structure, but they also reflect our committee structure. So the community board agendas will be differentiated into 4 areas. The operations report will deal with geographic specific reports related to that geographic area of the community board, and they will cover off the services and assets area, the finance area, and the regulatory and consents area, and the customer support, request for service data, information, etc. Primarily an information sharing report which offers the community boards information specific and directly related to the area that they are responsible for. So as Steve mentioned before, the Northern Community Board, a significant change for the Northern Community Board is that it will focus on the whole of that Northern Community area, or the Northern area, which includes townships of Athelgaston, Lumsden and Mossman. And so that community board will actually be talking about and considering information relating to all of that area, including the rural parts of that area as well. The second report, or another report on the order paper of a community board, is what we're calling the Community Leadership Report, and it will deal with things like strategy and policy matters. It will deal with things that the community liaison officers might be reporting back in terms of the community organisations they are working with, or that they know of, that are the issues related to particular community organisations in that geographic area. And also the Community Leadership Report will deal with the ability for community boards now to be able to allocate funds by way of grant funding, because Council has changed the way in which it will be distributing what used to be the Community Initiatives Fund. It's actually spreading that out across the 9 community boards and allowing those decision-making abilities to be made by the community boards themselves. Third report is the council, what we call the council report, and it will deal with much more national, regional and district-wide related matters. So it won't be geographically specific to the community board area, it will be specific to the district as a whole, but again used as a mechanism to provide and drive information to the community board that will be of importance or significance that they're aware of. They may not be able to have a decision-making role with regards to it, but they may be able to have some influencing role that might support the feedback that comes through back through to council in dealing with any of those matters. And the fourth and final part of the order paper is what we're calling the chairperson's report, or specifically the local report. Now the biggest change for those chairpersons who have been around a while will be that they won't just be able to rock up to the community board meeting with a list of things on the back of a cigarette packet or on the sheet of paper that they finally grabbed off the kitchen bench before they left the house that night to go to the meeting, and list a whole lot of things that they wanted to throw on the table for staff to take away and come back and sort out. The chairperson's report will be required to be prepared prior to the meeting and be part of the order paper and part of the agenda that goes out a week before the meeting. That will be prepared in conjunction with the committee advisor for that particular community board, and it will go in as an info council report and be prepared, like I say, a week before or a week to 2 weeks before the meeting, so that it's on the agenda and that actually people have the ability to be able to read it from a staff perspective, to be able to raise any matters that might be raised by that report itself. So that's a significant change in terms of good practice, I suppose, but also the ability to get our community boards and our chairpersons actually in the mode of operating the way we as a local authority need to be operating. So what we're trying to do with that is actually provide some sort of structure that allows the community boards to feel that they are part of council, and that also the community, by way of the community liaison work and the community partnership work, are able to also see how they can feed into the community board structure, and the community board can feed out of the council structure to support the communities going forward. That leads me into the second point, I suppose, which really is about the difference between, from a community governance perspective, there are two areas that we predominantly talk about. The area of the representative leadership approach, which is ultimately what council does in the community governance space, which is up there. And the second pillar, which is a community-led or community development approach, and what we're talking about is the community-led development approach, which really is handing back over to the community the ability and the capability and the capacity and the responsibility of delivering stuff for themselves, by themselves, with support from various agencies that might be able to assist and provide advice and support for those communities to get on and do stuff for themselves. That is one of the, hopefully, main areas of improvement, from want of a better word, that we will see to support our council and our council staff in being able to get on and do what their jobs are, what they're here to do, rather than getting involved in a whole host of what traditionally would be seen as community initiatives, and taking them out of the gambit of a responsibility of council. And as a staff, and especially through the services and assets area, we have to have the confidence and the support, knowing that we can push back and say, actually, that's something that the community needs to be doing, not something that council through the community board needs to be doing. And Matt's been, and his services and asset and activity managers in the services and assets area have been doing a lot of work and having a lot of conversations about how that will fold out. But it's really ensuring that the work program for our whole organisation, but it predominantly falls back to services and assets, is supported, so that our services and assets aren't just getting added to by way of a community board coming up with a whole series of initiatives or projects willy-nilly. There needs to be, again, some structure associated with that, and we know that Matt and the service and assets team are really working hard on developing and building that approach internally, so that our staff have the confidence to be able to actually push back and say, that's not the process we follow now to go through this, and we get out of that mode of what projects do you want to add to an annual plan, or what projects do you want to see happen. We actually have to incorporate that through our processes of project planning to allow the community boards to understand where they fit in that picture. And that's, again, starts to see why we've tried to create some structure at the community board level back into our organisation's operations, so that there is some sort of seamless approach that we're trying to undertake and show. So the community-led development approach is really handing, for want of a better word, the power back to the communities to say, the opportunity is there for you to actually undertake and deliver these things. Don't rely on council to do them, because we don't have the resource. Our resource is focused on particular matters that will come through the various processes that we've talked about, and that's ultimately what we're measured on. So there are, and it's a wee bit like going back to the future. I mean, always use the example, Steve came down here in the early 2000s when he was Chief Executive at Thames Coromandel to see how community development was successfully being implemented and delivered by the Southland District Council. So this isn't new. This is how I would suggest 90% of communities across the country in the relationship between councils and community actually deliver for especially in rural provincial areas, for the communities themselves. It doesn't rest back on council's responsibility, it is actually the responsibility of the community, and through this structure we're hoping that we're actually able to support and enable and provide the assistance as appropriate to our communities to get on and do stuff for themselves. The third thing is around what does it mean for us at an operational level, some of these changes. So Steve alluded to the concept of service delivery forums. We're proposing that there be 4 service delivery forums held per year, in which ultimately, or basically, we will be inviting the community board representatives to come into here to meet with primarily our activity managers over a 3 to 4 hour period, whereby they will, the Wallace Takatimu Community Board would go from one activity manager to another activity manager to another activity manager to another activity manager over a 3 to 4 hour period, and they would sort of follow in sync with each other, follow suit, to be able to talk about those matters and issues that are affecting the community boards, but also our staff, activity manager staff, have the ability and opportunity to be able to relay back the matters that are affecting the district from a district-wide perspective. So it's about breaking down, or it's about encouraging a relationship and breaking down any barriers to building that relationship by actually establishing 4 sessions a year where the community board representatives have a direct link and direct liaison at a face-to-face level with our activity managers and at a staff level. And again, working with services and assets, we will be developing and building those service delivery forums under that speed dating concept that Steve talked about. Another thing that we are, which will be new, developing, is twice yearly the community board chairs will meet with the chairpersons of each of the council committees. So there'll be a group of about 14 or 15, including the mayor, and they will meet twice a year to again address at that elected representative level the matters that are of significance and importance in their eyes and ears, and bringing them to the council, as well as council having the ability to bring the council perspective back to the community board chairs so that they can then cascade that down to their community boards and communities as well. And further to that, one of the things that we are doing and planning for is a 3-day strategic workshop for the new council in February of next year. It will be the first time that we invite the 9 community board chairs to that, to a council strategic workshop over a 3-day period, and some of them may not be able to commit to 3 days, but again the invite will be there for them to be able to attend as they are able to, but again to be part of the conversation that council needs to be having and will be having in matters that are of a district-wide, regional and national significance. So those strategic workshops that we have with the newly elected council primarily are a good platform to start the conversations at the council level with some of those national and regional and district matters that the council needs to be familiar with and aware of, and actually now providing the opportunity for the 9 community board chairs to be part of that conversation, hopefully offers them the opportunity to also see things from through a different lens. And then I suppose, ultimately the final point that I just wanted to make with regards to the structure, with regards to community-led development, with regards to some of the new forms of interaction and alignment of council and community board and community, is that, as I said at the start, this is actually all about relationships. And it's really built on the premise that for this to succeed, so someone asked us, I think it was Anne actually, in one of our ELT meetings, Anne asked us, well, what will success look like? And basically the ultimate of what success will look like is that we will see council and the community boards and the communities that they serve actually aligned in understanding the reasons and the rationale as to why decisions are made. So people still don't necessarily have to agree with the decisions, but if there is because we don't, that's politics. And there's a lot of ideological reasons why some people will support something over another, etc., etc. But if we can break down the barriers in terms of ensuring that the information flow is such, and ensuring that information flow is two-way, and ensuring that information is actually supported by relationships, and that relationships are supported by people understanding whose role is what, when and why, and how things are done, then I think that's what we can start to think about what success might look like from a council perspective, but more importantly, from a community perspective. So it's all about relationships, 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 and the final thing, it's all about communication, back to the community and from the community to council.
Flow on from those forums, it'll still be necessary for staff to go through that inter-council report process and take that to council for changes, is that correct?
Yes, and if they need to go through the board processes, they'll need to go back to the boards themselves.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't thought, but it's not a bad thought, is that if there was something generic, then there's probably no reason why we couldn't have a whole series of board meetings that afternoon.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a common thing on which we need them all to adopt an agreed position, my government's been what mentions afterwards, but she's trying to have 19.
One was better.
But yeah, no, so yes, the formal decision making will need to go through the formal meeting process, whether that be council and its committees or the boards. But it's certainly a good opportunity to brief them on all of them in one easy way on a particular issue that might be of interest to them. So a good example actually is which I've used a couple of times, is when we were doing the Freedom Camping bylaw review, Michael Safiti went around 27 community boards. By the time he put the travel time and all the rest of it for what was probably, I don't know, in some cases it might have been half a trickle in our discussion, but other cases it would be 10-minute discussion. Huge cost. These forums present the opportunity to address to all of them, here are the pros and cons, the generic issues you might want to address and think about in relation to freedom camping, where you're allowed and don't allow, and the controls you can have. And then in the individual workshops, you can actually have a discussion about the issues that apply to a Reti versus Fiordwin versus Wallace Takatimu, etc. So that's where hopefully you can get some much more efficient processes happening as well to flow through. Now, yes, what they want would need to then go into a formal board meeting agenda item, but how we deal with that again, we can move through.
And I guess my comment here would be that it would not just be services and access that would need to be part of some of those conversations.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Organisational wide issues can get covered in that. So yeah, the current freshwater reform stuff, for example, would be a great example of a topic that would be useful to cover in the first hour or so general briefing session for all. What are the implications for Southland District of that? Would be a good example of a topic to cover. Michelle?
Yeah, probably it just feeds on really. Some of our thinking around that community leadership report was being coming strongly from the policy team as well, was to utilise that mechanism for some greater pre-engagement around particularly violent policies before we go out for formal consultation and actually feedback from the board, and to build that relationship in between those formal meetings. So we don't have to wait for meetings to be communicated with our boards around what's taking place. So a great mechanism to
First off, that's a massive piece of work. I love the way that's illustrated. On the assumption that council agree in principle to how that looks, do you or Rex have any thoughts at this stage whether there's areas on there that council may want to make changes within, or too hard to crystal ball gaze on that? I'm just curious whether you see that spots in there that might be particularly, I don't know, of issue.
My sense of Rex will have his own view as those local subcommittees and the concepts of actually moving away from formal subcommittees and going to much more of an informal liaison group with the likes of Stuart Island Jetties group, which is essentially just a user liaison group. You know, they give us advice on house and manage these. We're consulting with them at the moment on the design options for the rebuild of Olva and Golden Bay. Do they really need the full decision-making process? I think it'll take time for some of our elected members, both at the local level as well as the council level, to adjust to that. That's one area they might have a bit of discussion and debate about.
The other one is, I didn't mention it, those four down the bottom,
Yeah.
the ward subcommittees. We're hoping that we'll be able to show that there's actually not a need for ward subcommittees going forward, and then ultimately, and this is where we are in a transition period, because we're thinking out to while this has got to be implemented as of October this year, some of the mechanisms and levers and tools to support it won't actually be able to be introduced until LTP 2021, July 2021, especially around if there's changes from a rating perspective or rating area units and so on. And so trying to get those synchronised is actually the next phase of the piece of work. That will become part of the conversation about those ward subcommittees at the bottom there, whether they're actually necessarily needed. And we're thinking they're not, but we need to actually be having that conversation with the elected reps as well. And again, an area on that slide up there, which I didn't go into, but it's something that we're doing a significant piece of work in at the moment, in terms of getting a better understanding, is around our joint committees and our CCOs. And we don't have a lot of CCOs, but how those joint committees are, for want of a better word, managed, administered, and what that might mean for council going forward as well. That's a whole other piece of work.
It's more of a contextual question. So before the community governance review, there was 27 community boards. So we've reduced that number by 2/3, but I'm interested in how long the structure before the review was in place and how it got to be that large and seemingly convoluted.
So the community board structure has always been part of this council since its inception in 1989. And as Steve said, it varied in terms of its rationale. Some community boards were township specific and others were a more rural, urban geographic area. And that was really primarily, without putting words in other people's mouths, primarily at the whim of what was wanted by the community themselves. And there was some iterations of that changes over time, but primarily that was the community board structure. The CDA, or Community Development Area Subcommittee structure, which is a beast of this council alone, again came about as a result of requests primarily by the villages themselves, in asking for an area that they could be rated for, so that they could get on and do some local stuff. So actually, putting it bluntly, they weren't necessarily set up for representation purposes. They were set up for a source to generate a bit of revenue within a boundary, and then they needed a decision-making body to be able to support them to do what they needed to get done. And they've evolved. So they all weren't established in '89, but some were established, most of them were established throughout the 1990s. And then as we undertook that community governance review and peeled back what their purpose was, it became quite clear that they'd morphed from what was possibly thought their intention was to be a representative body to actually just something that they could generate some revenue so they could get on and do some stuff. And then they became a wee bit of like a runaway train, in the sense that because our terms of references that we wrote for them or prepared for them and that were approved were the same pretty much as what a community board's terms of reference were, and their delegations were the same, it actually blurred the lines of what they were about. As well as that, some community boards that had previously existed had decided in rec review 6 years before, so in 2012, 2013 when that was undertaken, to go from to voluntarily go from a community board to a CDA based on the assumption that they would have similar terms of reference. So Lumsden was a good example of it. And again, the other thing that's occurred over a period of time is there's been no consistency around how they operate. So some meet twice a year, some meet 6 times a year. And so again, through the community board structure that is now we're trying to create some consistency and standardisation. Now what that means is that we're saying, you know, they can meet up to 10 times a year. We're going to suggest that they schedule 6 meetings, but some of them may not need those 6 meetings. So we're sort of thinking that Lussa or Northern might actually only need 4 meetings a year, but they can and will have scheduled 6 at this stage. But yeah, there's been a 30-year gestation period to get us to where we've got to now.
We certainly had CDAs in 01, I can tell you that much.
Yeah.
Just to follow on from that, Rex, as we can see from that map over there, there was quite a wide part of the district that didn't have any.
You got that
of those
facing
CDAs.
on you.
No. Not at this distance. No. So there's about 10,000 people that didn't have a CDA or a community board, and presumably that was because they hadn't asked for any kind of representation in that way.
Or alternatively, they were more in rural areas that didn't necessarily, they weren't part of a particular township or village or canton. So primarily, you know, the Gorge Road was probably a bad example actually, because it did cover a larger rural area. But Garston, Balfour was solely related to that particular residential area of the township. So that the areas that were primarily those grey areas were the areas where they weren't there weren't townships as such. They were the farm areas, and a lot of those large areas actually don't have a lot of people living in them because they're mountain ranges or national parks.
Yes, but there's still 10,000 people spread out
throughout that.
Yeah,
who are living on farms rather than living in townships themselves. And that comes back to the rating area unit perspective. Is they were set up to generate a rate so that that they could then spend it in their local town.
And it's something like Topinui was a good example. It stopped at the mowing boundary.
Yep.
So even though you had people who were living just on the outsides of the Topinui area, they weren't included in the CDA because it was outside the mowing boundary.
And Michelle picks up a good point actually. The boundaries weren't even consistent. So there were some boundaries for a CDA which were different to the boundaries for the community centre or hall that existed in that town.
Waikawa was a good example. In fact, I went to the Waikawa CDA elections last time round, and the boundary again was the areas they mowed in terms of the berms, and the community hall was actually outside of the boundary.
Yeah.
But again, it was on the opposite side of, so on one side of the road was in, the opposite side of the road where the community hall was outside.
So the area they wanted to rate for was actually outside their area. Probably.
One of the facilities they wanted to rate for was actually outside of the area. So yeah, there was more of those. Now again, those things are easily changed, I suppose, but this is about a new model covering much larger geographical areas and what their role is.
So there is one other question, I guess, that everybody would possibly be thinking about. If after October the 12th, the new council decided that they wanted to keep the CDA arrangement, what would that mean?
Well, that's their prerogative.
It is their prerogative, and we operate in a political democratic system, and at the end of the day, our elected members will make the call about what's appropriate for representation.
Presumably we've thought about what if.
So one of the questions that I've certainly talked with Claire about, because it is a concern that Claire has raised with me as the Governance and Democracy Manager, and the implications, the flow-on effect of such from a workflow perspective, is the question that we would have to ask our newly elected council is, what is the purpose? What do they think a community development area subcommittee could do that would make it beneficial to remain part of the council representative leadership structure than operating necessarily outside of that representative leadership structure and operate as a community entity, fulfilling the community-led development principles. And because one of the things we heard regularly through the community governance review and the representation review actually was how the bureaucracy of council, how long it took to get things done, the decision-making processes that had to be gone through because of the delegations that either a subcommittee or a community board had, etc., etc. So we're saying you don't have to worry about that if you're operating outside of a committee structure, outside of the representative leader. So that would be a conversation that I think we would be hoping to have with the council, to saying what is the purpose that you're trying to achieve that can't be achieved by this alternative model, which we've got numbers of case studies operating effectively all around the country.
Well, in fact, I went to the community planning meeting on Stewart Island last Wednesday night, and it started off with, whilst process is built on work we'd started a while ago, 18 months ago, Chamber of Commerce talking about offering a free community leadership development program for 14 islanders of their leaders to help go through a thing on the mainland costing $1,400 a head. That's Chamber of Commerce. Followed by the Rakiora Heritage Group talking about redevelopment of their museum, where they're at, where they're going, all community driven. Followed by Stewart Island Promotions talking about the work that they've been doing, and obviously they've been a key driver of Dark Skies, but also the work they've done with the Rakiora Challenge and how that filled up in about 4 or 5 hours. They had 250 event runners that'll bring 700 or 800 people to the island, whenever it is, in a few months' time. Followed by the Predator-Free Rakiora, Richard Carter. Now again, that's a multi-agency project, but obviously very reliant on the community. 2 dock people talking about biodiversity and development of facilities, and again, the extent of the predator-free work and the biodiversity work, again, very heavily reliant on the community groups. And Great South and ES talking about their regional strategy pieces, and then followed by us and the community board there talking about electricity and jetties and things. But a great example of community-led development and action with those community groups standing up and talking about the projects and the work they're driving within their community, yes, with support from other agencies, and then the agencies talking about some of the things they're doing. It's community-led development and action in terms of the community themselves taking ownership for what they want and the direction they want to go. Doesn't need to have council and community boards and all the rest of it there adding to the bureaucracy. We need to be part of it and help facilitate those things, but the community is very capable of driving a lot of those things themselves. And that's just one example of one community.
So in the case of, say, pick one, a community like Curio Bay, wanting to do they've already done something pretty spectacular down there, but if they wanted to do something else, what would the role of the Waihopai Toi Toi Community Board be in that potentially?
Hopefully just to facilitate and encourage and be a cheerleader from the sidelines, and yes, give them some, if they need a bit of grant money, for example, to help make some of those things happen, contribute some of that, but working through how do we support and facilitate rather than doing it for them. It's that whole encouraging and supporting people to do it for themselves rather than creating a dependency mentality, I suppose, is the piece you want to avoid.
And the other thing I think Steve would be assisting to open some doors,
Yeah,
for getting some further advice or assistance, whether it be specifically from council staff or pulling in external agency resource.
Yeah.
That we, from a council perspective, have connections to that. If they needed provincial growth fund advice, for argument's sake, it would be aligning the MB staff, Mark Patterson as an example of a staff member, or Abby Cheeseman, and putting them in direct liaison with them, that they otherwise may not necessarily know what or how or who to deal with. So it's that connector role that council has to have rather than the doing role or the deliverer role. And the other thing I think that Steve's really hit on the head, and your questions are alluding to, Chris, is we're talking about stuff that traditionally is not the rates, road and rubbish stuff. And if we want a long-term sustainable district, that's what we need our communities to be focusing on. I mean, I regularly give Hartley a hard time about having the best maintained roads with moss growing on them because we haven't got people driving on them. And I just noticed that actually coming back from Te Aneo the other day, going from Te Anau to Winton at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or 2:30 in the afternoon, and there was my car and there was another car behind me, which in fact had Trudy Hurst in it, and we were the only two cars pretty much for the whole time from Te Anau to Winton on Thursday afternoon, and some of those roads. So that's what this is about, is long-term sustainability and the long-term future viability of our communities. Is not going to focus, is not necessarily going to require curb and channeling. It's going to require stuff that is actually enacting or assisting and supporting those communities to be part of developing themselves. And that's the stuff that I'm liking hearing when we're talking to our staff about this, and that's the topic of conversation that we'll be needing to be having with our elected reps as well.
Quite a mindset change.
And I think that was why Steve put in that, or we put in that handout you've got there. This is a big change. This is a fundamental change for how we operate and why we do stuff. But that's cool. That's what the challenge is about.
Any other questions?
One of the things, Steve, I think we do want to say is we want to bring our staff back together again similarly in about sort of March, April next year. And that's all the staff. I mean, one of the things that's really important, that's why it's been really good to see the level of engagement and people attending these 7 sessions, has been that we've traditionally have introduced stuff and not necessarily communicated the why and what it might mean. So the purpose of these 7 sessions has been really to start us all thinking about that, because we're all part of this. Even though some people might be at the coalface more than others, we're actually all part of how this is going to roll out. And so Steve and I have talked about it, that we think it's really important that March, April next year, we revisit this with everybody again, provide the same opportunities and actually get some of that feedback directly from everyone.
So by then we'll obviously have all of our new elected members in place. We've had a chance to have had some initial sessions with them, including the strategic workshop, and have the answer, any uncertainty about the direction of things will have been clarified, and we'll have had the initial first couple of board rounds of working through these things, so it'll be a good chance to provide some talk about where we're going and how this is working, and tweak it if we need to, based on our first set of engagements over that first 5 months, 5 or 6 months of the new triennium. So yeah, that's certainly something we want to do. Okay, if there's no further questions, thank you all, and hopefully that's been useful.